Good evening, all. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this commodity spotlight, our new initiative to keep knowledge first as our core competency and enable our clients, industry, the entire ecosystem to have a better perspective of markets and trends. So this is going to be the first of its kind in the industry where we're trying to bring players right from high net worth individuals to small retail traders and investors, as well as small mom and pop jeweler kind of small jewelers, and including we have some our institutional clients, fund managers of domestic mutual funds, who are also joined. So it's a varied class of people who are joining, and we have a tremendous turn up today. So we're beginning this commodity spotlight as a journey. So it will be extended into different commodities, different sectors in the coming months or so. So you're picking up this journey from gold. This is the metal which we all Indians love to own and love to trade, love to wear it. So we are all fascinated by this metal, and we have seen this prices of this metal has doubled almost in between 2018 to 2020, 2.5 years, and then consolidated a bit and then corrected over the last 12 to 18 months or so. So from the top, we're down 8-10%. So before getting into this thing, I would like to put up a small backdrop. So can we have the presentation, please? So I'll put up some basic context and then take it into the panel. So can we have the next slide, please? So this is something which is a very interesting chart. This is how the global liquidity over the last, let's say, 15 years has been emerged post Lehman crisis. So what we did in this chart is we have taken every event like the QE1, which has been triggered by the Lehman Brothers crisis, and put the Fed balance sheet. This is the Fed balance sheet, how much money or the liability side of the Fed balance sheet, and how it evolved over the next 2.5 years. Typically, we have taken 10 quarters from the event and how the liquidity. So before Lehman crisis, $1 trillion balance sheet. Post Lehman crisis, by the end of 10 quarters, it went to close to around $2.2 trillion. That's the QE1. So we have taken the next event, that's a QE2, where it was announced. From there again, so we made a seasonality chart. So how we can compare the event to event. So QE1, QE2, where the Fed balance sheet went to 3 trillion by the end of QE2. And then QE3 came in, and by the end of QE3, Fed reached $4 trillion of the balance sheet size. Then came a bit of a status quo between 2015 and 2017. Then towards the end of 2017, the taper tantrum came, tapering started. By towards 2019, the tapering has actually brought the $4.5 trillion balance sheet to, again, under 4 and to around $4 trillion. Then the COVID hit. So, and after that, again, there's a massive, we have never seen this kind of liquidity in past. So almost in few months time, Fed's balance sheet has doubled or more than doubled from $4 trillion to now close to around $8.5 trillion. That's मतलब आप सोच भी नहीं सकते इतना liquidity है. That's the kind of money which is there in the system. This is from the US. Similar operations have been done by many central banks, especially post-COVID. It's not only the phenomenon in US, Europe, Asia, many central banks, along with the governments. Fiscal balance sheet, the fiscal expansion, जो government अपना spending बढ़ा रहे हैं, दूसरे side money printing हो रहा है. So both combined, there is a huge expansion of systematic liquidity in the system. Right, this is what the kind of scenario we are in, And during the time of QE1 to QE3, gold prices went up by close to around 500-600%. So can we go to the next slide, please? But current liquidity, actually post March 2020, you can see it has an impact on overall commodity prices. It's not only liquidity, it's also supply chain shortage. It's also logistical issues with the shipping lines being blocked. Everything fell into place. Overall commodities, broad commodity index went up by more than 80% in the last 18 months. So it's a huge impact on commodity market as a basket, right? Can we go to the next slide, please? But at the same time, inflation. So globally, most of the developed world have been targeting inflation. They wanted an inflation. For example, US wanted 2% inflation. UK wanted inflation to rise. EU wanted a slight accommodative inflation to be there. Japan has been struggling to create an inflation, which it went, and a sustainable inflation there. So every economy post-COVID, they're able to trigger the inflation. Though India had inflation slightly earlier, second wave actually slowed down that. Again, now we have started to see prices in India to increase, and eventually Indian inflation in the next coming months should be higher. But if you see US, EU, UK, everything has actually has gone up. The CPI numbers have been even beyond some of these targets. So the Fed actually shifted the goalpost. अभी बोल रहे हैं कि हम लोग inflation absolute number target नहीं करेंगे, we will target average inflation target. So probably 2% की inflation के सामने they might even allow the inflation to go to 3.5, 4%. But overall अगर average inflation 2% के आसपास रहेगा तो मेरे लिए ठीक है. So that is how the inflation targeting has changed. So desired inflation आ गया है, but still none of the central banks or the governments are not in a position to be able to say that I will start withdrawing the liquidity at this point of time. So we need to see how it is going to evolve from here on. Can we have the next slide, please? And this is how the last 20 years of gold has behaved. So if you see September 2001 to 2011 is been the massive rally of 6 times. The gold prices have gone up by 600% in almost a decade. And there are mini cycles in between also, where आपको अगर 2003 to 2008 अगर देखेंगे तो लगभग double हुआ, so around 110% in 5 years of time. And of late, 2015 to 2020, again prices went up from $1,000 to 2,000 plus. So again, it's almost double, the 100% price rise within less than 5 years. So the question here, which we are discussing, or should be trying to throw some light, are we in the 2008 or are we in this 2012? The question is that, see, post 2012 is a massive correction of around 40% from the top, 45% from the top. But if you're saying that we are at the juncture of 2008, 2009, where the liquidity in the system is going to remain and it's going to propel the prices to a new high. So are we going to have another massive rally? So I think this is the question everyone is trying to answer. Every investor is trying to pose this question. So I'll take this discussion to our esteemed panel. So let me introduce you to our panelists. To begin with, I'll start with Mr. Prithviraj Kothari ji. I think he doesn't need any introduction here. Everyone knows him. We all call him Bullion King of India. So Prithviraj ji is Managing Director of Riddhi Siddhi Bullions. He is also President of India Bullion and Jewelers Association. So, and he advises government on various fronts. He advises exchanges. So he is very insightful about the domestic markets, international perspective, regulation, policy, etc. And then Mr. Philip Newman. Philip is Managing Director of Metal Focus. It's a large independent research firm and consulting firm, and they are known for their insights. They're known for their data and the ability to understand the depth of these markets. They have operations across the world. They collect data from across the world, and they also understand the entire supply chain. They also understand how the financial side of the market functions. They also advise a lot of financial institutions, refiners, mining companies, large corporations. Even they also provide services to World Gold Council and various other data mining companies and data providers. So welcome, Philip. And last but not least, Mr. Sundaram is again a huge known figure in India, especially in the gold circles. So he's CEO of World Gold Council India, and he has been a very active proponent of gold policy in India. He has a lot of inputs and insights on the policy level. He advises government, again, various exchanges, and he has tremendous amount of experience, right from banking to FMCG to consulting, and he's been with World Gold Council for nearly now 8-9 years. So welcome, Som. Welcome you all, and thank you all for giving us your time. And of course, your insights will be really cherished by our clients. And thank you all for joining us. So I can start the discussion with the basic question, right? So we have been discussing about inflation. So inflation is clearly visible everywhere, actually. So commodity prices are going up. So CPI indices have been showing that. So it's been visible now. It's not been even anticipated. It is visible. But none of the central banks, including the large ones, the developed ones, are not still anticipating or expecting inflation as a threat. And now they just see that it's going to be a transitory inflation. It's not a structural inflation. So it's going to go away without any major issue. And they continue to print money, especially the US. But printing money is not solving the problems at this point of time. It's just delaying or it's postponing the issues. So, Philip, what do you think? How long this printing of money is going to continue? And how do you see central banks, the ability to unwind the stimulus, and how the inflation is going to impact gold prices globally?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, Metals Focus, to take part in this webinar. I think you've raised, quite a lot of interesting questions there. You're right. There's lots of debate now in terms of inflation. Is it transitory or is it more permanent? I think the challenge for central banks, and I think your slides really highlighted some of these really key issues. I thought there were some very good slides to show, is this debate about, do they, or how quickly do they telegraph or start to increase rates to perhaps control inflation, given the debt that has been built up, and of course the cost of servicing that debt. And I think that will be an important constraint on the part of central banks in terms of their ability to raise rates. Of course, I think what's really interesting is we look at, as you mentioned, about rising energy prices, the fact that's feeding through into higher inflation, but that doesn't seem to have translated into rising gold prices. Normally, if we take a step back, if you're an investor, you're buying gold either as a hedge against inflation or as a safe haven. And normally, one would have expected concerns about rising inflation to translate into buying gold as a hedge against inflation. And we certainly haven't seen that. Instead, investors have looked at rising inflation and therefore what that means in terms of expectations for higher interest rates. And we've seen that, of course, in terms of rising yields, We've seen that in terms of a rising, of strengthening dollar as well. And both of those have weighed on the gold price. So we've seen really perhaps the opposite of what one would expect. So I think that really reflects some of that deteriorating or that worsening investor sentiment towards gold, at least for the short term. So I think we've seen, an interesting dynamic that has been playing out.
Yeah. Thank you, Philip. कोठारी जी, आपको क्या लगता है इन्फ्लेशन का कितना रोल हो सकता है कि फ्यूचर गोल्ड प्राइसेस में?
देखिए, इन्फ्लेशन फियर है, नो डाउट है कि इन्फ्लेशन का फियर तो रहता ही है, बट आई थिंक जब टेपरिंग करना चालू करेंगे तो उसमें मुझे ऐसा लग रहा है कि इक्विटी मार्केट पे थोड़ा सा इफेक्ट आएगा, नहीं कि गोल्ड प्राइस के ऊपर इफेक्ट आएगा। अब आखिर इनको एक दिन तो टेपरिंग करना ही पड़ेगा। इट मींस इन लोग कितने दिन एक्सटेंड करेंगे। लास्ट मीटिंग में भी आपने देखा था कि उन्होंने एक्सटेंड किया, फिर डेब्ट सीलिंग का भी उनका इश्यू है, उसको भी उन्होंने एक्सटेंड किया। तो लॉट ऑफ प्रेशर अभी भी बना हुआ है। तो आई थिंक दे हैव टू, कहीं ना कहीं तो उनको रोकना पड़ेगा। तो और उसका इफेक्ट नो डाउट अगर ऐसे ही चलता रहा तो इफेक्ट उस पर आएगा। जिस दिन भी कहीं पे भी कोई अनसर्टेनिटी होती है तो गोल्ड प्राइसेस पे काफी इफेक्ट करेगा। और अगर किशोर जी, अगर आप इन्फ्लेशन से गोल्ड को अगर कंपेयर करोगे तो गोल्ड अभी भी आधे प्राइस पे भी नहीं है। इफ यू कंपेयर विद द इन्फ्लेशन, अगर इन्फ्लेशन से आप उसको अगर कंपेयर करने जा रहे हैं तो गोल्ड मुझे लग रहा है कि अभी $4,000 $3,000 होना चाहिए। तो ये भी चीज है कि इन्फ्लेशन से अभी तक उससे कनेक्ट नहीं है, और जिस टाइम पे भी हुआ तब गोल्ड भाग जाएगा, गोल्ड ऊपर बढ़ जाएगा।
Right, exactly. Actually, that's the phenomena. Actually, so why this disconnect between inflation and gold price? Because traditionally, gold we all studied and we believed that gold is the inflation hedge. So of late, that connection has been broken. So what do you feel? Why this? What has led to this?
Yes, I mean there has been some disconnect clearly, but I think it has to do with a lot of expectations of growth. Right now, if you look at the markets, yes, there are concerns of inflation in some places, and even central banks have come out and said they would be more comfortable with inflation, etc. But everything is subsumed by this big expectation of growth coming back in a big way. And what we are seeing is post-COVID, post-lockdown, clearly we are also seeing growth, not just in India, I'm just saying across, we are seeing this growth, but will the growth really be sustainable? That is the key question. And today it is not that inflation and the linkage between inflation and gold has completely decoupled. What is happening is there is an expectation of growth, which is keeping this under wraps. So instead of actually talking about inflation, we need to talk about, will this lead to the expected high levels of growth that the markets are expecting? Because that is the only thing which can get the world out of the 2 years mess. Therefore, in this temporary phase, we feel that there is no linkage. It is not true. It has got to do with another aspect of this formula, which is growth. If growth does not come and you find that inflation is clearly going the way it is, then you will see a different reaction.
Yeah. So you mean if the inflation becomes stagflation, that means inflation
Correct.
is there, but the growth is not there, then it's going to be a super trigger for gold prices to go up.
That's right.
Yes. So again, one more thing which I've been seeing is the investor appetite for gold, or the kind of interest in gold. So where we have seen gold ETF flows, especially has in after 2013, I think where gold has fallen, ETF flows have fallen by around 930 tons. But then again, see, for the next 2 years, there were still 100 odd tons which went into that. But this is the first year after 2015 we are witnessing overall net outflow from gold-based ETFs across the world. Actually, we have seen we lost around 156 tons this year to date from overall gold ETFs. So, Philip, what is the driving this? Any specific reason or apart from the fall in prices, or any other physical market or anything, supply displacements, any norms you see?
I mean, I think first of all, it's important to take a step back. You're absolutely right in terms of the growth we saw and then the net outflows this year. But, we have to bear in mind that, global holdings are still, above, I believe it's about 3,100 tons. So although you've had those outflows, they are still, pretty close to the record high levels, that we've seen, very recently. So I think it's important to put those outflows into that context. In other words, investors are still, very long, if I can use that word, in terms of their ETF holdings. And so I think it's important to make sure that we're not comparing this by any sense to what we saw in terms of 2013 and that washout that we had in the marketplace. So I think the outflows that we've seen this year, putting them into that context, they do reflect that negative sentiment that we've seen. We've seen gold prices, making some attempts at 1900s, and now, of course, they are struggling to get back towards $1,800 an ounce. And I think there are some of those investors that do feel that, where do we see gold? Is it still behaving as a hedge against inflation? We've spoken about that. Should we be buying gold as still adding to our portfolios as a diversifier, given that equities are still doing exceedingly well? So I think there are some of those concerns out there, hence why we have seen some liquidations. But as I said, they are still high or exceptionally high by historical standards.
Yeah, I think I understand that. I think in percentage terms, it's just very small, actually. So we lost around 3 to 4% of total, because the entire base itself has shifted much bigger. But one thing which I've wanted to highlight again is, see, even in the outflows, US has seen a major outflow. So I think a year to date, roughly around $10 billion went out of US based ETFs, whereas Europe has not seen that kind of an outflow. Especially Asia has actually seen an inflow, not rather than an outflow. If I see country-wise also, India, China, France, to some extent Germany has actually seen inflows into ETFs even today. But whereas US, to some extent in September, even the Europe actually has lost some thing. Why this divide between Asia and West? Asia is still buying gold, the investors typically, because when I see ETFs, I see investor sentiment. So why this is so different from West to East?
In a sense, you've had those different dynamics play out over a long period. For example, when you think about, 2013, when you had overall that washout, a lot of that gold was turned into small bars, shipped into East Asia. So we had massive demand at that time, the likes of China, especially, in other parts of East Asia as well. Now, I think what you're seeing here, you mentioned some of those different dynamics. So, for example, some of the ETFs in East Asia or Southeast Asia as well. I think you've had some opportunistic buying as well. And I think that's really quite an interesting dynamic. So when we do, for example, look at the net outflows that you mentioned a while ago, that only gives you one side of the picture. For some investors that are exiting the market or reducing their exposure, there are others that are seeing this as we're seeing some bargain hunting emerging. And then when you look at, for example, the likes of Europe and especially Germany, you look at the interest rate environment, again, that is still meaning that the market is still very positive towards gold. I know we haven't touched in terms of coin and bar demand, and maybe we'll do that a little later, but just very briefly for now, the likes of the German market has been very strong this year. So you do see those very different dynamics playing out as well.
Yeah, I think so. I'll put this question to you again. So, yeah, as Philip explained, the difference between the West and East, especially coming to India. India, especially September itself, we have seen around 440 crores inflow into ETFs in India, cold ETFs. It's massive. Whereas world is exiting, or not exiting, I cannot put it exiting. So there's a outflow, let's say net outflows. So why this contrast? What do you see differently in India?
Well, first of all, yes, 440 crores could appear very, very big, but in a global market, it is hardly anything. Yeah, it's less than a ton. Is that correct? Yeah, 440 crores, less than a ton.
Yes.
So it is not a very big number in that sense. Number two, you see the way, again, from a distance, when you look at it, the policies are playing out in different economies, different regions. You know, it doesn't affect all asset classes similarly. Yeah. So there is therefore that bit where you see in different regions, different asset classes affected. Of course, everywhere we see equities going up because that's a very large asset class. But otherwise, for instance, with the kind of inflation that we are talking about, we haven't seen the increase in real estate. You know, in India, generally we would expect inflation to first show up in the real estate. You know, we're not seeing that yet, okay, although the demand has come back. So when you have this kind of run up in the equity markets, you know, it's quite good. I mean, it's sizzling almost. And you also don't have other asset classes generally reacting. You know, real estate hasn't gone up. When equities have gone up, you would generally expect real estate to go up. Yeah, it doesn't, because people make profits and then they go and buy houses. It doesn't happen that way. In that context, I think some investors would have said, okay, where do you diversify? You know, very limited. Apart from buying physical gold within the market, where do you park your funds? All right. So therefore, ETFs have benefited in general. So I wouldn't probably give too much of an weightage to the fact that, you know, this is a trendsetter. It's not a trendsetter. It has something to do with the local market and the dynamics here.
Yes, perfect. So, so coming from investors to jewelry, again, I think so. Jewelry demand, which is normally around 2,400, 2,200 tons a quarter, can now came down to around 1,400 tons, especially this year. So, so how do you see, Prithviraj, how do you see this one? Ki jewelry demand, especially COVID का एक तो impact है, of course I understand the lockdowns and all, कि how do you see the demand from here onwards, especially jewelry demand, because 2012 के बाद जो fall आया था prices में, उसके बाद jewelry demand substantially बढ़ गया and investor demand कम हो गया because the price triggers investors to sell it back. So how do you see the jewelry demand emerging from here? कि from here next year or maybe next 2 years?
देखिए 2012 के बाद में अगर आपने देखा होता कि गोल्ड इतना एप्रिसिएशन नहीं हुआ था कंपेयर टू इक्विटी मार्केट या कंपेयर टू एनी एसेट क्लास, तो वहां से गोल्ड उसका एक ही रेट के अंदर जा रहा था, एक रेंज बाउंड के अंदर था और इतना एप्रिसिएशन हर साल नहीं हो रहा था. बट आप देखोगे कि अपना इंपोर्ट फिगर जो होता है वो तकरीबन 800 टन के आसपास होता है और 800 टन के आसपास होने में इसमें हार्डली है, अगर आप देखोगे तो 8 to 10% अगर आप उसको देखोगे बार फॉर्म या इन्वेस्टमेंट फॉर्म में चला जाता है और रेस्ट ऑफ द जाता है ज्वेलरी फॉर्म में और 65 to 70% ओनली मेकिंग इन द प्लेन गोल्ड ज्वेलरी. तो इसका हिस्सा जो बेसिकली द साउथ एंड महाराष्ट्र एंड एवरीवेयर बेसिकली इन्वेस्टमेंट पर्पस के लिए भी लेते हैं और कभी भी उनको जरूरत हो तो उसको मेल्ट करके या अगर या उसको एक्सचेंज करके दूसरी ज्वेलरी बनाए, तो इस हिसाब से वो लोग प्लेन गोल्ड ज्वेलरी पे ज्यादा ध्यान देते हैं.
राइट. सो
तो हाँ,
यस सर.
तो प्लेन गोल्ड ज्वेलरी का जो डिमांड रहता है वो ज्यादा रहता है. और जैसे अभी ज्वेलरी का डिमांड अगर आपने देखा होगा, वैसे हम जैसे फर्स्ट कोविड के टाइम पे ऐसे लग रहा था कि बहुत से लोगों को पैसे जरूरत होगी, गोल्ड बेचने को आएंगे, बट लकीली उसका पूरा उल्टा हुआ. लोग अब जैसे अभी बात कर रहे थे ना, यूएसए में ईटीएफ को निकाल, ईटीएफ में थोड़ा लिक्विडेशन हुआ, बट अगर आप देखोगे अदर वे से, यूएसए के अंदर गोल्ड फिजिकल काफी मात्रा में बिका है। अगर आप ईटीएफ को छोड़ोगे तो $100 प्रीमियम तक फिजिकल वहां पे गोल्ड यूएसए में बिका है। मतलब वहां पे भी लोगों को ऐसा लग गया कि अपने हाथ में कुछ गोल्ड चाहिए। तो
Yeah.
इन लोगों का सोचना थोड़ा चेंज हो गया है। और यही सेम चीज यहाँ पे भी हो गई कि आपने देखा होगा फर्स्ट कोविड में हमने $75 प्रीमियम देके भी गोल्ड को इंपोर्ट किया है। और
Right.
गोल्ड सडनली 57 ऑल टाइम हाई पे, उसमें आप देखोगे तो ईटीएफ में भी सबसे ज्यादा बाइंग ईटीएफ के अंदर हुई थी। $150 प्रीमियम तक ईटीएफ में बाइंग हो रही थी। तो इट मीन्स होता है कि अपना जो ट्रेंड है इंडिया के अंदर वो बिल्कुल अलग है। ज्वेलरी की अलग एक मार्केट है, हाई एंड ज्वेलरी की अलग मार्केट है, डायमंड ज्वेलरी की अलग मार्केट है। तो उस हिसाब से अपनी जो ट्रेंड है वो ऐसे ही चलती आ रही है।
Yeah.
कभी इसमें डिमांड ज्यादा रहता है, कभी इसमें डिमांड जाता रहे, बट 650 से 800 टन का अपना इंपोर्ट फिगर रहता है, वो बरकरार रहता है वहीं पे।
यस यस, आई थिंक बिल्कुल आप सही बोला कि एक्चुअली जो स्क्रैप जो आया था, स्क्रैप सप्लाई जो है, आई थिंक थाईलैंड है, वियतनाम, इवन टर्की फॉर दैट मैटर, की मतलब मैसिव स्क्रैप गोल्ड आया था, जहां पे इंडिया में तो बिल्कुल नहीं आया एक्चुअली स्क्रैप जो है सेल्स के लिए, जो रीसेल के लिए। आई थिंक वो एक्चुअली शो करता है अपना अपना कंज्यूमर का बिहेवियर काफी डिफरेंट ये है। राइट, एब्सोल्युटली। So, Philip, again coming back to you, how do you see? See, the central banks have been on buying spree for gold, right? And but still, gold prices have corrected now. How do you see the future role of central bank buying in gold prices? What is your outlook there?
Well, I think ultimately we see central banks on a net basis, so when we take away the selling from their purchases, remaining very, very positively on the demand side. We've had over the past week or so the likes of Poland giving some guidance on what they're looking to buy. That's quite unusual, I have to say. But I think overall, we do think that central banks will remain very healthily on the demand side. Yes, there will be obviously some selling, some liquidations, and we'll be interested to see how the likes of Turkey play out. Do we see Russia come back into the market, which has been such an important buyer for so many years? But I think overall, they will remain on the demand side. In terms of their impact on the gold price, I think it will be mixed. I think on a positive note, that will send, I think, a positive signal that they will be committed to adding to the portfolios or adding to their reserves. But I think really the key determinant of the gold price will be how institutional investors view gold and how institutional investors behave over the coming years.
Yeah, I think from that actually also I want to put the focus to how do you see? So central banks have been diversifying from their dollar reserves. And so that gold has played a significant role, especially during the trade tensions between US and China. So again, when we are seeing rekindling of the trade tensions and still uncertain relationship between these two powers, so how do you see the power struggle between US and China, and what would be its impact on emerging market economies, or specifically with gold as a diversifier or even as a safe haven with that backdrop?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question, because if we go back to early last year, so when it was starting to really play out the trade war, if I'm honest, our forecast then was that gold would do initially very well, and then it did the complete opposite. And I think one of the reasons for that is that investors looked at the impact on emerging markets that you correctly identify, and they thought there would be some of the major casualties, and therefore we saw flows into the US dollar. And so that suddenly strengthened the dollar, and gold initially struggled. That became, if I can use the phrase, a bit like a vicious circle. Investors saw the concern for the global economy. They saw gold underperforming, and therefore they thought, well, if gold can't perform well in this scenario, when can it perform well? and then we saw liquidations. And so it, in a sense, initially played out, if I'm honest, the opposite to how we thought it would. And so I think it really depends on how those tensions do play out. I think going back to the beginning of this webinar and how interest rates would perform, I think central banks are concerned about also raising rates too quickly because they don't want to derail the economic momentum that we've seen there as well. So I think we could have a scenario that I think some investors would maybe look towards gold in that environment. Other investors will perhaps look in terms of perhaps buying defensive equities. And so you could still see equities performing relatively well. And that could act as a headwind to gold. And also, we could see a similar scenario that if investors think that emerging economies will struggle again, given that unfortunately COVID is still quite rife in so many economies, then again that could be dollar positive, and again could potentially weigh on gold as well. So there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty out there, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think keeping the focus on demand itself, I think, though demand supply play very little role in actual price realization of gold, still I think probably I will direct this question to Som, or maybe Prithviraj also can add to that. How are you seeing the effects of pandemic on the mining related issues? How the scenario on the supply side is looking, and how the demand, especially I think this is the first festive season after the pandemic, and where most of the stores are open. How the demand is emerging here? I think Som, you can put some light on that, and Prithviraj can add on the demand front also.
Sure.
Yeah. Just like demand, even supply was affected during the COVID period. Mines were shut, and there were lots of restrictions. So we saw even the supply was as much affected as demand. And if you see the last quarter, the third quarter GDT will come out in a couple of days. If you see the last quarter, mining supply has come back because all the mines again have started come back, COVID compliant behavior, slowly. And right now it's almost going back to the pre-COVID levels, and we will see this continuing to rise because also quite a bit of these mines are, well governed and organized. Players are doing a very good job when it comes to managing supplies during COVID. Recycling again was affected, and it has now come back because the world is slowly coming back. Let's hope it just continues on the journey. When it came to demand, obviously we saw the moment the second quarter, we saw the lockdowns being lifted in various places. People rushed to buy, and there was also a softness in price which helped the price demand. Now, what are we seeing in terms of demand and supply? I don't think there is any problem in supply now. There's plenty of supply, and you could see that even in the premiums and discounts being played out. When it comes to demand, the indications that these B2B events are showing amongst jewelers. We saw the IIJS. We have seen many other B2B marketing. IBJA itself had conducted a few here. Everything has been, if I can use the word, super success, at least from their own word. So that tells you that the trade confidence is very high. The jewelers are coming back, the stocking up is happening. They're all expecting that the consumers are going to buy, and it's being seen in the marketplace as well. So barring any unforeseen lockdown again closer to Diwali, we should see, if I may say, a very, very good season, which could probably open the windows. And I have always been saying that the pent-up demand is going to show up sooner or later in India. Clearly, I'm more talking about India. You will see a large spike in jewelry demand. It's not only due to price and availability, etc. Yes, they are factors. It's also because social functions are coming back. Weddings are coming back.
Yes.
There's a lot more relaxation now about things. So we should see a big spike in demand. Now, whether it happens during this Diwali season or in the first quarter, I think we should be prepared for it. Now, will that spike sustain? I don't think that is also a good thing to look at it. It's not like 800 will become 1,000 tons. No, that's not going to happen. But we will certainly see a spike followed by a slight growth above the pre-COVID rates of growth. That's the expectation I have.
Yes. पृथ्वीराज जी का ज्वेलर कम्युनिटी से क्या क्या क्यूज मिल रहा है?
देखिए, इसके पोस्ट कोविड के टाइम पे जब प्रॉब्लम सबसे बड़ा लॉजिस्टिक इश्यू था और बहुत से स्टेट में ऐसा, हर स्टेट के अलग अलग रूल्स एंड रेगुलेशंस थे, हर स्टेट में एंट्री एग्जिट सब पॉइंट के ऊपर उनके सब बैरियर्स थे। उसके बाद में सबसे बड़ा इश्यू जो होता था लेबर का होता था। लेबर के बहुत से प्रॉब्लम उस टाइम पे चल रहे थे। Order was huge for everywhere. Each and every factory have a huge order, but they cannot fulfill the order. और जैसा कि आप अभी सोम ने भी जैसे कहा कि जो IIJS का एग्जीबिशन हुआ, इट मीन्स ऑलमोस्ट 2600 स्टॉल and mostly it's all gold jewelry. If you say the first time, it's a jewelry exhibition from IIJS.
Yeah.
It's only for gold jewelry.
Yeah.
तो उसमें आप यकीन करोगे कि उनके ऑर्डर उनको दिवाली तक पूरे नहीं कर सकते हैं। इतना ह्यूज, और काफी टाइम के बाद में एग्जीबिशन, फिजिकल एग्जीबिशन हुआ। द ह्यूज 2600 प्लस स्टॉल, मोर देन 40,000 विजिटर्स इस टाइम पे, इस कोविड सिचुएशन में उन्होंने विजिट किए। मोर देन 40,000 विजिटर्स देयर। और अब नेक्स्ट में चेन्नई के अंदर है ऑन 21st, 22nd, 23rd। तो डिमांड काफी अच्छी है, गोल्ड प्राइस भी स्टेबल है। तो मेरे हिसाब से अगर इस तरह से रहा तो सब लोगों के बिजनेस अच्छे होंगे और उनको जाके दिवाली उनकी सुधर जाएगी। नॉट इतना हाई मैं नहीं बोल सकता हूँ, क्योंकि प्राइस भी हाई है, लोगों के परचेजिंग पावर जो होती है उसमें भी कट हो जाता है। तो माल उनका रेगुलर बिकना चालू होगा। अब आपने देखा होगा शोरूम्स भी नए नए ओपन हो रहे हैं। तो उस हिसाब से थोड़ा थोड़ा फिर एक डर मिट रहा है लोगों में। अब लोग फ्रीली खरीद करते हैं, डबल वैक्सीनेशन हो गए हैं, स्टोर खुल रहे हैं। तो थोड़ी सेफ्टी रीजन से लेके उनको डिमांड वापस धीरे धीरे वैसे आ जाएगा।
राइट। सो अगेन कीपिंग यू ऑन द डिमांड itself, अभी एक्चुअली क्या है कि द न्यू generation, especially the Indians, the millennials, let's say, right? जो मतलब perception है कि reality है, I think Som will maybe able to clear that कि what do you see that Indian youngsters or the millennials, they are not as attracted towards gold as the older generation is. So is the substitution happening? Where is the substitution happening? Or what could be the steps to for the jewelry industry or investor industry to get them back to towards gold? Is any World Gold Council is having, of course you'll have a lot of data on that, or you'll have studies on that?
Yeah, we did a study, and it is not, what we would say is they are indifferent to gold. Between the ages of 20 to 35, when you look at it, gold doesn't figure in their in the list. You offer them 50,000 rupees. In our study, it came out that gold ranks very last in terms of what they will do with that money. And it's clear because you have electronics, you have travel, you have other experiences coming up way ahead of gold. But at the moment they reach that 35, we see that the interest in gold definitely comes back. But it is not good, 20 to 35. Currently, yeah, 35, they probably seem to be interested. But if you leave this, it is not good for the industry. We have, of course, got this You Are Gold campaign, a category level campaign where we have got TV advertisements and digital ambassadors doing the work to say why gold is not just for the big occasions like weddings, etc. Every occasion where you should celebrate, every moment that makes you deserves to be celebrated with gold. That's the tagline. So we have come out with some ads, and with the support of GJPC and the rest of the industry, we are rolling out this campaign. It's on as we speak. But the important thing is for the industry definitely to target this segment and not be totally reliant on the weddings, which now account for 60% of the demand. Yes, it is not going to go away. But what is important is you got to blend the current requirements, the emerging contemporary requirements of the youngsters, so that gold is seen as not just as an investment, it's also seen as a very, very modern thing. And we are looking at it. Industry has to clearly keep it in mind. One of the important things is also to get it into the digital mode. Okay.
Right.
Lot of good work is happening across, but I must say what we are seeing compared to what we are going to see, what we are seeing now, you will see that it is probably at the very nascent stage.
Yeah. We faced that actually, and it was very interesting development in digital gold, and there are a lot of youngsters who want to buy, but it's a very small ticket. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, because anyway the earning the income level of the people between the 25 and 35 will be much lower than the 35 plus. Anyway, the amount of disposable income the 35 plus will be significantly higher. So in overall, their purchasing power will be also much lesser. So again, keeping in that in the same this thing. So again, now the hallmarking has become mandatory everywhere. It's being so initially some jewelers started to complain against it, but I think it's good for everyone. So it actually brings small jeweler and the branded large jeweler and at the same level playing field as far as purity is concerned. So you're only competing on the brand and maybe the design. That's the only competition left. So purity level pe even the सबसे बड़ा जो branded chain stores है and the smallest street corner jeweler is now at par as far as if the hallmarking is concerned. So still, I think Metal Focus ka report I was reading, so it says that 38% of the overall market now is captured by the large branded stores, right? So how is this transition from, let's say, unorganized, the small jewelers to the organized, the large chain stores? How do you see this trend expanding in the future? Whether it is it's healthy, number one, of course, and how the urban and rural divide in this context is. कोठारी जी.
हाँ, देखिए सबसे बहुत महत्वपूर्ण सवाल है कि हॉलमार्किंग आने के बाद में जो डिफरेंशियल था कि शोरूम में अच्छा सोना मिलता है और उसमें प्योरिटी के काफी इश्यूज आते थे, नो डाउट इश्यूज आते थे, जब जाके हॉलमार्किंग HUID कोड सरकार को कंपलसरी करना पड़ा, मैंडेटरी उसको करना पड़ा, और हर एक इंडस्ट्री ने उसको एक्सेप्ट किया है. और हॉलमार्किंग आने से छोटे ज्वेलर्स और बड़े ज्वेलर्स का जो कंपटीशन है, लोगों को एक डर है कि छोटे ज्वेलर्स का बिजनेस खत्म हो जाएगा या उनको लोग खत्म, ऐसा कुछ भी नहीं है. हमारा ऐसा मानना है कि अब जो डिफरेंस होता है बड़े ज्वेलर्स और छोटे ज्वेलर्स में, आप भी उसमें ज्वेलरी हॉलमार्किंग भी बेच रहे हो, अब प्योरिटी का इश्यू खत्म हो गया है, प्राइस का इश्यू खत्म हो गया है. अगर आप किशोर जी देखोगे तो हम लोग इब्जा एग्रीगेटेड स्टोर खोलने वाले हैं छोटे छोटे ज्वेलर्स के लिए, क्योंकि ज्वेलर्स को ऐसा एक डर कहीं ना कहीं बैठा हुआ है कि हमारा धंधा बड़े ज्वेलर्स से खत्म हो जाएगा या कम हो जाएगा. बट ऐसा नहीं है, हम उनके धंधे को कैसे और बड़ा बना सकते हैं उसके लिए हम लोग स्कीम लेके आ रहे हैं. हम लोग 718 डिस्ट्रिक्ट के अंदर, एक एक डिस्ट्रिक्ट के अंदर 6 से 7 दुकान हम लोग ओपन कर रहे हैं, जो इब्जा एग्रीगेटेड स्टोर होगा, जिसमें हॉलमार्किंग ज्वेलरी होगी, जिसके अंदर अपना एक सिंगल प्राइस होगा इब्जा का, ऑल द स्टोर हैव द सिंगल प्राइस. और उसके बाद में BIS इंडिया गुड डिलीवरी के बाहर उसमें सिर्फ मिलेंगे. उसके साथ में आपको जितने भी सप्लायर है उनके साथ में हम उनके टाई अप कर लेंगे कि सप्लायर उनको माल दे सकता है, उसकी हम लोग बैलेंस शीट वो देख के उसको एग्रीगेट करेंगे. उसके बाद में डिजिटल गोल्ड, SIP, लोन अगेंस्ट गोल्ड, उस तरह की हर तरह की उसमें हम लोग सुविधा प्रोवाइड करेंगे. जैसे कि अगर गोल्ड लेना है तो आपको एक ही स्टॉप के ऊपर सब मिल जाएगा. और ये जो चीज है वो चीज बड़े शोरूम में आपको पॉसिबल नहीं है, उतना आपको टाइम भी नहीं दे सकते, और छोटे स्टोर वाले आपको टाइम दे सकते. तो हम लोग में ध्यान में रख के हम लोग ने इस स्कीम को निकाला है कि किस तरह छोटे छोटे ज्वेलर्स का बिजनेस है. आपने देखा होगा कि हॉलमार्किंग BIS के अंदर रजिस्टर्ड भी काफी लोग काफी भारी मात्रा में हो गए. इसके पहले खाली 30-32 हजार थे, अब तो लाखों में हो गए हैं, लाखों 1 लाख के ऊपर हो गए. तो इस तरह से हम लोग प्लानिंग कर रहे हैं कि छोटे ज्वेलर्स और बड़े ज्वेलर्स के बीच की जो गैप है उसको कैसे खत्म किया जाए. और छोटे ज्वेलर्स, अगर मुझे एक चेन लेनी है, हॉलमार्क चेन में छोटी दुकान से लूं या वहीं लूं, तो मुझे उसमें कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता है, क्योंकि प्योरिटी सेम है. मैं अगर बगल के दुकान में जाके अगर चेक भी कराऊं तो भी सेम आएगा, और मुझे सेम पैसा भी मिलेगा, खाली उतना मेकिंग चार्जेस मेरा कट जाएगा. तो ये स्टेप जो लिया है, इससे इंडस्ट्री की ग्रोथ भी होगी, और जितने भी अपने यहाँ आपने देखा होगा कि फॉरेन इन्वेस्टमेंट अपने इस इंडस्ट्री में नहीं आ रही है, बिकॉज कैश ट्रांजैक्शन का होता था वो अब काफी हद तक खत्म हो गया है। उसके बाद में प्योरिटीज के इश्यू थे वो अब खत्म हो गया। तो अब मुझे लगता है कि जो फंडिंग, जो फॉरेन फंडिंग है या इन्वेस्टर है, वो अभी इसकी तरफ भी ध्यान देंगे, इस इंडस्ट्री की तरफ।
राइट। आई थिंक एक एक फैक्टर में जो बड़े ज्वेलर्स और छोटे ज्वेलर्स के बीच में, आई थिंक लार्ज स्टोर्स जो है, लार्ज स्टोर्स या बुलियन ट्रेडर्स आप मान लीजिए जो भी है, दे ऑल मतलब उनको खुद का प्राइस का जो फ्लक्चुएशंस वगैरह से काफी हद तक उन लोग वेरियस हेजिंग स्ट्रेटेजीज से उन लोग अपने आप को प्रोटेक्ट करते हैं, जहां पे छोटे ज्वेलर ये सब करते नहीं है। तो कई बार कोई लार्ज फ्लक्चुएशंस आ जाते हैं तो छोटे ज्वेलर्स को नुकसान होता है, एंड देन समटाइम्स इट बिकम्स, मतलब दिन में, एक दिन में अगर बड़ा फ्लक्चुएशन आ जाता है तो कई बार उनको कवर करने के लिए भी मेटल मिलता नहीं है टाइम पे, राइट। सो बट लार्ज ज्वेलर्स आर वेरी ऑर्गेनाइज्ड, आपको एक हेजिंग पॉलिसी होते हैं, सेंट्रलाइज हेजिंग डेस्क होता है, राइट, ऑल दे आर वेरी ऑर्गेनाइज्ड इन दैट वे। बट छोटे ज्वेलर नहीं है। आप अगर छोटे ज्वेलर को एक सलाह देना चाहते हैं कि हाउ टू हेज उनके रेगुलर बिजनेस को ध्यान में रखते हुए, कि आप कैसे उनको सलाह दे सकते हैं?
देखिए, छोटे ज्वेलर्स को मैं सलाह देता हूं कि कोई भी हेज करने के लिए आपके पास कमोडिटी एक्सचेंज है, ओके। उसके बाद में आप उसको कमोडिटी एक्सचेंज में हेज करने दे, बट ये हेजिंग इंस्ट्रूमेंट है। लोग इसको स्पेकुलेटिव के जैसा खेलते हैं कि लोग सुनते हैं कि भाव बढ़ जाएगा, ले लेता हूं। बट हेजिंग इंस्ट्रूमेंट के लिए आज की डेट में कमोडिटी एक्सचेंज अवेलेबल है, आप छोटी मात्रा में कर सकते हो। को 100 ग्राम्स के भी बार है, किलो बार भी है। उसके बाद में ऑप्शन है, सबसे बड़ा इंस्ट्रूमेंट है, ऑप्शन है। बट अवेयरनेस नहीं आ रही। हम इब्जा वर्ल्ड गोल्ड काउंसिल के हेल्प से बड़े बड़े हर एक छोटे छोटे स्टेट के अंदर हम लोग उसको अवेयरनेस के प्रोग्राम कर रहे हैं कि लोगों को कैसे समझ में आए। रही बात हेजिंग इंस्ट्रूमेंट करने की, तो मैं छोटे ज्वेलर्स को यही सलाह देता हूं कि अगर आपके पास 100 रुपया है, अगर आप गोल्ड खरीदते हो, तो सिर्फ 20 या 25 रुपए तक का आप हेजिंग उसको इंस्ट्रूमेंट कीजिए। अगर आप पूरा उसको हेजिंग करने जाएंगे तो फिर वही M2M का इश्यू आ जाएगा, मार्जिन का इश्यू आ जाएगा। प्राइस फ्लक्चुएशन बढ़ता है तो मार्जिन भी इंक्रीज हो जाती है। तो ये सब इश्यू से आप उसको दूर रहिए। अगर आपको लग रहा है कि अब प्राइस अच्छा हो गया, तो अपना 25% कमोडिटीज एक्सचेंज पे उसको हेज कर सकते हैं। और काफी उसमें क्या होता है कि थोड़ी बहुत लिक्विडिटी हाथ में रखनी पड़ती है। तो मेरे हिसाब से या तो दूर रहिए, या अगर रहते हो तो आप उसको 25 to 30% ही आप उसको कमोडिटीज में प्ले कीजिए हेजिंग इंस्ट्रूमेंट के हिसाब से।
Yeah. So, what is your opinion? How can we improve the skill set of these small jewelers, where they need to hedge, or how to hedge rather than, because the policy of a large jeweler will be completely different, and the needs of a small jewelers will be completely different.
See, the question, I agree with Prithviraj ji. What's happening with hallmarking and with these commodity exchanges is that it is getting orderly. You don't have to call yourself organized big jeweler. What is happening is you have to be a little more disciplined. You have to be process oriented. And these associations, as Prithviraj said, we are doing our best to reach out to the people. These are digital modes. MCX is doing something on its own. Now the spot exchange is going to come. So many things are happening which will organize your way of working. Size doesn't matter here. You look at banking. I want to just give two examples rather than, which will probably indirectly tell the jewelers what to do. Look at banking. Even after so many big banks, and we all know, every time even the finance minister says we need big 4 banks, that kind of stuff. Even then, you are actually, the licenses are given for small finance banks, because there is a role they have to play. And the best thing is that since the practices, the rules, regulations, they are very clear. Even if you have a small banking license, you can do your role more effectively. That's what all these, hallmarking or, hedging through the exchanges, all these things attempt to do. They give you a clear path. You don't have to be big to know them. Yeah. Similarly, let us look at your own area. I mean, when I say your own, what big institutions like yours do, broking, stock broking, equity broking, right? We saw big players come there, and look at who is the biggest player today, digital players, correct? They came in where people thought that there is no value addition possible, right. Correct? I mean, you know what is Zerodha and all those names. They have become so big amongst bigger players. So people in the jewelry industry should not get, in fact, they should welcome standardization of policies, processes, things like hallmarking, etc., because that takes away the problems, the differences which happen due to, I know this particular thing and I can do this without others knowing, which can all be actually overrun in no time. Yeah. When there is a standard thing, everybody follows standard, then all you need to bring in is your expertise, your designs, your customer service, how you can do it. Then it is an open floor. Size doesn't matter there. So It is very important, and it's happening today in India. Size doesn't matter.
Right.
Okay. As long as processes are known, as long as regulations are known, size doesn't matter. That's what all these things to do. So in terms of this, hedging and etc., all I would say is there are associations, there are, outreach programs we have. I think they should utilize them. In the digital world, I think it's one country. You don't even need to reach out. You can sit here and, have a thing. And we have a lot of work we will be doing with associations under our Swarna Adarsh Abhiyan. Let them take advantage of this and, use the tools available.
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, spot exchange. So there are two spot. One is onshore bullion spot exchange, which is regulation has been announced. Still, no one has, it's not still conceptualized in the sense no one has announced an exchange, but the regulations are out. And one bullion exchange in Gift City, that's the International Bullion Exchange. How are these both exchanges are going to change the way gold is procured and distributed in India?
The first thing I would say, if I may take this, Kothari, I will take this.
Yes.
First thing is, stop talking about International Bullion Exchange for us. Okay, it is international foray of India. India is a large consumer of gold. We need to also have a trading mechanism and invite foreign players. That's not for the domestic players. Let's keep it like that. When I say don't get too, imports might come, whatever, that will all be handled. But essentially, International Bullion Exchange is for international players and for India to play a global role. It is not going to happen overnight. It will happen over time.
Yeah.
We therefore, as a jeweler, if you're a jeweler, what you need to be worried about is domestic spot exchange. How is it going to come? How do I benefit from it, etc. Now, as you rightly said, the regulations have just come in. It is a very, very good thing. For the first time, gold has been defined as a financial security, provided it is put in a regulated vault and you have an electronic gold receipt, which is backed by gold. So it's essentially going to give you a financial security, which also will double up for your commodity needs when you need them. That's the fundamental thing. Now, how that plays out, definitely there are a few more steps to be taken on GST, on other taxes, capital gains, various things. A lot of representations have been made. The good thing is the framework has been announced. Everybody seems to be happy with the framework. It has been, for the first time, let's enjoy the moment. Gold has been defined as a financial security. It is not a very, very small thing. So definitely you will hear more about it. I think the views of all the associations are being taken. SEBI has gone about in a very, very professional way. They are still working at it. And I'm sure that it will be one of the best things that can happen to even, again, I come back to the small players.
Yes. Yeah, I think keeping that. So one of the most talked about, let's say, is nowadays is the flavor or whatever we can say is the crypto. So Philip, I would like to start with you or come to you. So how you see crypto affecting perspective of gold investor who is looking it as an alternative to fiat currencies? How you see crypto as a competition to gold?
That's a very good question, and that's certainly been flavor of the month. Well over a year, maybe a couple of years now. I think what we've seen, of course, as several cryptocurrencies, raced away, enjoying tremendous upside, and at times, comfortably outperforming gold. We heard that, well, maybe this is the new alternative investment. And I think, it certainly took some flows away from gold. I think there's no doubt about that. I think that what I would say is, it's benefited from a speculative standpoint, but I guess I'm still not convinced that it acts as a safe haven. I think in terms of some of the tremendous upside we've seen, and then the liquidations, that level of volatility, I think, as I said, does do well if one wants to invest in a speculative asset, and that's fine. But if you're taking a step back and you're looking at, where should I be putting my money from a safe haven standpoint, then I think, to be honest, I think that still does benefit gold, and I don't think that the cryptocurrency space really fulfills that role, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah, it doesn't have the safety, so it can't be safe haven. So पृथ्वीराज जी, क्या लगता है आपको कि इंडिया में क्या परसेप्शन है क्रिप्टो को लेकर? क्रिप्टो को एज एन ऑल्टरनेटिव ऑफ गोल्ड देखा जा रहा है, कई वॉलेट्स आ गया इंडिया में भी, अभी तो बहुत सारे पब्लिसिटी हो रहे हैं, एडवर्टाइजिंग हो रहे हैं।
पर देखिए, कहीं ना कहीं पे तो इसमें कोई रेगुलेटरी नहीं है, द बैक नहीं है, तो कहीं ना कहीं तो क्रिप्टो करेंसी में एक थोड़ा सा डर रहता है। बट हाँ, ब्लॉकचेन आने के बाद में, ब्लॉकचेन होने के बाद में, अगर देखिए अल्टीमेटली आज नहीं तो 5-10 साल के बाद में इंडिया को भी क्रिप्टो करेंसी खुद की अनाउंस करनी पड़ेगी। द वे ऑफ चेंजेस, जो आपने देखा होगा कि अपनी 10 साल में जो टेक्नोलॉजी जो चेंज इतनी एडवांस हो गई है, अब आप देखिए अब कितनी चीजें जल्दी जल्दी फास्ट मूव हो रही है। पहले हम कोई कार बुक करनी थी, एक बुक करने थे तो टैक्सी बुलाते थे, आज ऑनलाइन उबर है, ओला है, स्विगी है, जेमोटो। देखिए आप पूरे ट्रेंड को कितना जल्दी चेंज हुआ है। नो डाउट आफ्टर द कोई भी कंट्री अगर उसको रेगुलाइज करती है और उसके बाद में क्रिप्टो करेंसी अगर होती है, बैक होता है, रेगुलेटरी होती है, तो मेरे हिसाब से इज द बेस्ट वे टू हैंडल। बट हाँ, नो डाउट अभी जो है क्रिप्टो करेंसी जो इतना जो यंग जनरेशन के अंदर उसका एक अलग क्रेज है। सिर्फ अभी तो अपने बिटकॉइन देखते हैं, बट इसके साथ में नंबर्स ऑफ थाउजेंड्स ऑफ हो गए हैं क्रिप्टो करेंसी। तो नो डाउट कहीं ना कहीं यंग जनरेशन भटकने जाए, ये सबसे बड़ा डर है यहाँ पे, क्योंकि लोगों को हर एक को इजी मनी बहुत जल्दी चाहिए, आइदर इक्विटी हो, हार्ड मनी। मेहनत किसी को आज की डेट में पसंद नहीं है। जैसे कि आपने देखा होगा कि स्कूलें बंद है तो लोग अभी लिखना भी भूल गए हैं ऑनलाइन होने से, तो बहुत सी दिक्कतें आएगी। तो इसी तरह है, जैसे आपने देखा होगा द गेम्स अभी स्टार्ट हो गए, ड्रीम 11, एमपीएल, एक क्या एक जनरली यंग जनरेशन को दूसरी तरफ लेके जा रहे हैं। जो बेसिकली अपना जो बिजनेस होता है वो बिजनेस पे फोकस नहीं हो रहा है। हर एक को इजी मनी चाहिए, वैल्यूएशन अच्छे आ जाते हैं, तो हर एक को एक इंटरेस्ट हो जाता है, नहीं मैं भी वो चीज करूं, बट सक्सेस फ्यू होते हैं।
Yeah, right. So Som, what is World Gold Council is looking at crypto? Is it going to challenge the position of gold?
Gold is centuries old. Our only position is you must welcome all asset classes. Consumers, investors must always have choices. There is we don't talk about crypto, as Phil rightly said. It's highly speculative at this moment, volatile. You don't know what to do when you have a problem. There are many things. You can go on and on, but that's not the thing. There is a set of investors who believe in it. It has produced it. Well, let it remain whatever it is. People are making money out of it. But our simple position is it is a risk asset, highly risk-based asset. So you have crypto, you have more gold. That is the thing. Because when you have equity and debt, we say a certain amount, say 10%, 15%, makes your portfolio very strong. If you have crypto alongside, you have to have more gold because the risk is much higher.
It actually increases.
That is the way we should look at it. And whether crypto survives and what form it comes, that's all for the future to see, as Kothari ji said and Phil said. And the second thing is, we also have to wait out, as we said, digital gold is just in its infancy. So we have to take the right things about crypto, etc., and also see position gold accordingly for the millennials. So it's, in a sense, if you see, it falls in place. Millennials are attracted to crypto for certain reasons, and so why can't gold attract some of those features? That's what the digital players have to look at.
Yeah, fantastic. I think the second most important, or let's say second most discussed topic after this thing is the global warming and climate change. So Philip, again, I'll come to you. what do you see as climate change impact on gold mining activity? So the decarbonization commitments by the governments, how it's going to impact the gold mining activity and the production and gold prices in a way?
That's a very good question. I think what you're seeing really from the mining industry is an increasingly strong response in terms of the ESG, the environmental, social, and governance issues. You're obviously seeing more miners reporting on this. I think it's becoming front and center for many players in the industry. And so I think you'll certainly see them responding to a whole range of issues they have to deal with, be it chain of custody through to the environmental issues that you touched upon. I think for the time being, we're not seeing a negative impact, certainly not on that part of the industry. I think taking a step back with gold prices where they are, much of the industry is cash positive. And so we are looking, I think, the industry really to remain, in very strong health for the foreseeable future. I think it'll be interesting how it plays out in terms of the ASM, the artisanal and small-scale mining area. That's an incredibly important part of the gold market, of the mining sector. And I think it'll be interesting to see how the environmental legislation impacts what is a highly fragmented, in some cases unregulated, but still facing, I would say to you, growing regulations as time goes by as well. So I think that's an area of uncertainty, there's no doubt about it. But I think we are starting to see some parts of that market gradually and very slowly respond to this as well.
Yeah. Som, you have any perspective whether it will have an impact on cost of production? If at all, how much do you see?
Well, as you know, Kishore, the World Gold Council, we have the leading miners and as our members, and we have issued several standards. One of them is the RGMP's Responsible Gold Mining Principles, which most of our members have adopted, and it is ESG based. So there's a lot of work, as Phil said, being done by the mining industry. One very important aspect is, for those who are interested, they can actually, go into our website and see the amount of work that's being done at various mines to reduce, to be ESG compliant in many ways.
Yeah.
But very important thing is, when it comes to ESG, gold is not just about the mined gold. Mined gold is a very small fraction of the amount of gold that is there in this world. 190,000 tons of above ground stocks, and so quite a bit of portfolios which are looking to be ESG compliant or balance out the ESG will certainly find gold, both due to the RGMPs, Responsible Gold Mining Principles, as that improves, and also due to the fact that there is already so much gold which is mined and available, which has actually zero emissions in that sense. They will find this gold as a very good, very useful tool to diversify and become more ESG balanced. So we see gold's role in the emerging ESG scenario as extremely positive.
Great. So, so I think more or less a lot of issues we have covered on gold. So I'll take a little deviation and go to Philip and say, Philip, what's silver again has been a fascinating run-up before the correction. So though it has a little higher degree of volatility and all, but it attracts significant investor attention. So what's your take on silver prices? Typically, the question is, if I had to invest today, should I prefer gold or silver? The gold-silver ratio has been a big topic. So what do you prefer, gold or silver? And what's your outlook on silver?
That's a very good question. I prefer both. I would say to you that, as you just touched on, but it was a very important point about the high volatility. It's a much smaller market. So you do all other things being equal, so to speak. When gold does well, silver tends to outperform positively. and when gold struggles, silver tends to underperform. When we go back, it's only last year that the gold-silver ratio got up to 124, which is a record high level. At that time, investors saw that the economy wasn't doing very well. Gold also struggled a little bit, and silver lost out both as a precious metal and also behaving as an industrial metal. What we're seeing now is that the ratio has picked up a little bit, so we're now in the high 70s. And again, investors initially, to go back earlier this year, they were looking at the green economy. Silver does very well there. Its largest use is in solar cells. They saw the growing use in electric vehicles as well, from a longer term perspective, all very positive. Whereas now investors are a little bit more concerned about the economic outlook, and so silver has struggled again. So I think, where do we see silver? We're quite positive about gold over the coming, say, 6 months or so. And so again, that could be good for silver. And so again, we could see silver do well. For example, we think that silver next year could get back up to maybe a high of $30. So I think that's quite a positive development in that sense.
So what's the gold price target for the next 2 years, let's say?
That's a good question. Well, I think, from everything we've talked about, we think there's still a lot of uncertainty out there, unfortunately, in terms of, what COVID could do. We still got, things you've touched upon earlier yourself. Where's the energy crisis? Where will that leave us? The supply chain disruptions are certainly not run their course. The saber rattling between the US and China. So we think that gold could this year, over the coming months, perhaps get up to $1,900 again, and next year it's possible we could get back up to perhaps $2,000 again. As those concerns about from a hedge against inflation, does that become front and center? We think there's still room for equities to perhaps face another correction as well. So we could again see gold get back up to 2,000, and in that scenario, again, silver could get up to $30 as well.
Great. कोठारी जी, सिल्वर का ETF का परमिशन मिल गया, तो आप क्या देख रहे हैं कि कितना जल्दी सिल्वर ETF आ सकता है इंडिया में? इन्वेस्टर्स काफी समय से वेट कर रहे हैं, बहुत डिमांड तो है, तो हाउ द सिनेरियो इज, कैसे पॉसिबल है कि और कितना जल्दी हम लोग देख सकते हैं ऐसा कुछ?
आई थिंक देखिए, सब हर चीज हो गई है, पॉसिबल हो गया है। एमसी वाले के साथ में, हमारे एसेट मैनेजमेंट कंपनी के साथ में हमारे रेगुलर टच में होता है, कैसे प्रोडक्ट होगा, कैसे यूनिट उसके होंगे, कैसे उसका एनएबी होगा, वो सब के बारे में सब हो गया। अब खाली सिर्फ यही है कि जब ही सेबी अलाउ करते हैं उस दिन से ETF लॉन्च हो जाएगा। आई थिंक कपल ऑफ मंथ इसको स्टार्ट हो जाएगा। और सिल्वर, नो डाउट सिल्वर, एवरीवन वांटेड द सिल्वर ETF। हम लोग काफी सालों से मेहनत कर रहे थे कि सिल्वर को एसेट क्लास में डाला जाए, बिकॉज सिल्वर इज नॉट अ एसेट क्लास। तो उसको अब किया है सेबी ने, थैंक्स टू सेबी एंड एवरीथिंग। अब मुझे लगता है कि जो हमारा 5,500 टन के आसपास का इंपोर्ट सिल्वर का जो होता है, अगर ETF में आने के बाद में उसको बढ़ के 10,000 से 15,000 टन हो जाएगा, क्योंकि हर एक को सिल्वर इन्वेस्ट करना है, लेना है, हर चीज है, बट उनका सब वही होता है कि फिजिकल उसको कहाँ रख के फिजिकल लिफ्ट करना इतना इजी नहीं है। और उसके हिसाब से सिल्वर में आपने देखा था, जैसे फिलिप ने भी कहा, ग्रीन एनर्जी में यूज हो रहा है, अपने यहाँ पे इंडस्ट्रियल यूज काफी हो रहा है, इवन इंडस्ट्रियल यूज है। फिर अपने यहाँ पे पान पराग, मसाला, ये सुपारी, इसमें भी काफी भारी मात्रा में इंडस्ट्रियल यूज हो रहा है। डेंटिस्ट में भी काफी यूज हो रहा है। तो सिल्वर का जो यूज हो रहा है वो काफी अलग बढ़ के हो रहा है। तो धीरे सिल्वर इज अ बाय प्रोडक्ट, नो डाउट। इसमें कहना मुश्किल है कि इसकी कॉस्ट क्या आ रही है, बट सिल्वर जब भी होता है उसमें हर एक को उसमें रहता है कि मुझे मेरा पोर्टफोलियो में सिल्वर होना चाहिए, पर मैं रखूं कहाँ। तो सिल्वर ETF जैसे ही लॉन्च होता है, मुझे लगता है कि सिल्वर ETF के हिसाब से इंटरनेशनल मार्केट पे भी उसका इफेक्ट आएगा।
Yeah. So I think I'll take a few questions from the audience. So I've picked up few over the last few minutes. People have been posting. So one question is that, so last few months the data, though globally, especially Chinese data has been bad, macroeconomic data, but still gold has not benefited from that. Is gold tired, or is it the end of the run? That's the question. Either Philip, you want to take it up?
Sure. I think, yes, to use that phrase, I think gold at the moment is perhaps a little bit tired. I think some investors have seen how gold has struggled to regain some of those highs. And as I mentioned earlier, failing to get back over 1800 for the time being at least. And I think that has discouraged some investors. I think there's no doubt about it. But at the same time, you know, where we're holding now in the high 17s tells you that there is still some strong investor demand as well. And I think there is certainly some bargain hunting. Those investors that want to get in now before they believe we'll get back over 1800. And so we think, yes, there is some you know, liquidations, but I think there is some decent two-way activity. And as I said, I think there's still enough out there that could see gold recover at least partially in the back end of this year and going into early 2022 at least.
Yeah, I think the another question coming up again, it's more common, is what should be my gold weight in my portfolio? So I think World Gold Council does again a lot of studies about this, how much the portfolio weight should be in gold. I see there is a lot of difference world over in this percentage of portfolio allocation one should have in gold. Som, can you take that question? How much a person typically should have gold as a part of portfolio?
Yeah, yes, you're very right. The percentages are quoted differently, 2%, 5%. Generally, the Western market, they talk about 2 to 5%, but we talk about 5 to 15%. Again, it's not about the exact percentage. It's all about the risk of your portfolio. How much risk are you carrying, and how much risk mitigation can gold give you in that market? Gold, as you know, as Phil was explaining, gold is a long-term boring friend. It is better to have a long-term boring friend than a short-term, fascinating, opportunistic friend. Okay, so given that, you have to look at your portfolio. How much is your portfolio? What kind of risk are you carrying? So we say about 5 to 15% in India. But again, there is no hard and fast rule about it. I mean, if you're going big on Bitcoin, I would say maybe much higher than what is recommended in these terms. So these are thumb rules that are being given, but one has to work out oneself. But we have recommended 5 to 15%. We have even back tested it with some pension portfolios. They become a lot less volatile. They give you a better risk-adjusted return. So that's what we would say.
Yeah. So one more thing is, कोठारी जी, आपको क्या लगता है डोमेस्टिक गोल्ड प्राइसेस अगले 2 साल का कुछ व्यू है कि क्या लगता है आपको?
देखिए, अगर आप देखोगे तो नो डाउट अभी रुपी काफी डेप्रिशिएट हो गया है, 73.50 to 75.50 के आसपास हो गया, तो उसका इफेक्ट भी गोल्ड प्राइस पे आ गया है. तो मुझे 2 साल के टाइम पीरियड में लगता है ऑन डाउन साइड वेरी लिमिटेड, 45 to 46,000 ऑन द डाउन साइड. आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट इन टर्म्स ऑफ MCX.
Right.
MCX price 45 to 46,000 on the downside, and upper side would be 50 to 53,000 in just a 1 year time period. जहां पे भी मुझे लग रहा है कि अगर इक्विटी में कहीं पे भी करेक्शन आता है या कुछ भी अनसर्टेनिटी होती है, तो फर्स्ट गोल्ड प्रेशर में बिकेगा, डाउन आएगा. वहां पे अपॉर्चुनिटी बनती है कि गोल्ड को एक्यूमुलेटेड किया जाए. तो जैसे कहीं पे कोई भी अनसर्टेनिटी होती है, तो वहां पे गोल्ड एक्यूमुलेटेड कीजिए और उसको आप पड़ा रहने दीजिए. पोर्टफोलियो में रखना है, अगर आपका रिस्क फैक्टर कितना है उसमें रखिए. बट मुझे लगता है कि गोल्ड प्राइस 45 और 52 के बीच की रेंज बाउंड में रहेगा. ज्यादा मैं अभी फिलहाल बुलिश नहीं देख रहा हूँ, क्योंकि अब डर वैक्सीनेशन स्टार्ट हो गया है, क्रॉस द बॉर्डर स्टार्ट हो गई है, अक्रॉस द बॉर्डर, तो उससे हिसाब से थोड़ा होगा। प्रोडक्शन हायर प्राइजेज में प्रोडक्शन भी काफी भारी मात्रा में बढ़ जाते हैं, और उसमें बाइंग की अपॉर्चुनिटी इंडिया चाइना छोड़ के फिजिकल कहीं नहीं होती है। अगर ईटीएफ की बाइंग होती है तो फिर उसका मूवमेंट होता है। तो इस तरह की पूरी स्ट्रेटजी है कि गोल्ड 45 to 52 की रेंज की बाउंड मुझे एक साल के अंदर देख रहा हूँ।
Yeah, I think again, one more question is, dollar index and gold have both lost the connect. So how are you seeing US bond yields interacting with the gold prices in short term? So Philip, do you like to take that question? So dollar index and gold has now actually the broken connection actually. And also anyway, you already highlighted yields are not going to rise very soon, though the liquidity is going to continue for a while. So in your expectation of, you said key 1900 is not possible, and depending on the inflation where it could be, potentially have an upside of $2,000 plus. So should an investor like him, should we be banking on a dollar index too much to take his gold view, or should we be actually ignoring the dollar?
Well, I mean, I think if you take a look at the dollar against the gold, I would suggest that the dislocation isn't there so much. I mean, we've seen the dollar strengthen recently, and that I think has weighed on gold. So I think overall that relationship does hold, but the question is, or the person asking the question is correct, that it does, of course, break down at times. And I think one of the reasons it does break down is reflects institutional buying or selling, and the weight and how strong that those flows are. So you can certainly have an environment where the dollar is strengthening and gold is also rising if there are other factors that in the market that mean that investors are coming into gold. And so that buying can therefore outweigh how the dollar is behaving. But I think, looking ahead, as I said, I think it's not just about inflation, it's about portfolio moves. In other words, the gold price at the moment is also very sensitive to economic news coming out of the US. And so if we see that news, if we see some data releases turn more bearish, or we have a series of those in quick succession, again, that could weigh on equities, and therefore that could encourage investors to come into the market. I think for the time being, though, given where expectations are of interest rates, given the news coming out of the US Federal Reserve, I think that's one of the reasons why we've seen yields strengthening. And as we know, that gold can perform poorly when in a high yield or a rising yield environment, because it's not just about where yields are, it's of course about where expectations of those yields are heading. So I think, come back to the question, I think ultimately the relationship between dollar and gold will reassert itself, but I think there's enough out there that means that uncertainty will return. Because bear in mind also that when, go back to the previous question about is gold tired, when you're in this short-term bearish environment, investors tend to dismiss news that can be gold positive, and they tend to focus on news which is gold negative. Whereas if I look ahead over the coming months, I think things could turn, and we could see investors really focus on news which is gold positive. And that's, I think, where you could have that, at least for the short term, the upward momentum. As I said, we think we could get towards 2000 potentially. I will be surprised though if we break through that, if I'm honest with you.
Right. Great. I think we've covered a lot of them. I think most of the other, I think one question, it's slightly, so BIS hallmarking came into jewelry sector when it will be introduced in bullion. So no regulation on purity of bars and coins. So
No. एक मिनट में बताता हूँ इसका. The BIS introduced the India Good Delivery Bar.
Right.
तो जो भी बार इंडिया गुड डिलीवरी बार है, उसके ऊपर ऑलरेडी BIS के लोगो रहते हैं, सीरियल नंबर होता है, द मेक होता है और उसका लोगो होता है कि कौन सी रिफाइनरीज का है। तो ऑलवेज भी बाय विद द BIS रिफाइंड, उसमें ऑलरेडी है, जिसमें हमें लैब बनानी होती है, जो BIS का पूरा रेगुलेटरी होता है, NABL लैब होती है। तो उसमें वो प्रोसेस को पूरा करने के बाद में ऑलरेडी वी आर अंडर द BIS, द बुलियन रिफाइनर्स ऑलरेडी इन द BIS। लोगों को यही लगता है कि बुलियन पे नहीं होता। हाँ, 1 जनवरी के बाद में, यानी आप 2022 के बाद में ऑल द रिफाइनरी शुड बी BIS एंड NABL होना चाहिए, तो ही उसको लाइसेंस मिलेगा, अनलेस से उसको बाहर नहीं बना सकते हैं।
राइट। सो इवन द स्मॉल ज्वेलर्स इंडिया गुड ज्वेलरी ले रहे हैं, तो कोई मतलब डरने का कोई जरूरत नहीं है। इट्स ऑल प्योर एंड as good as marked bars basically.
Yeah, any case, once the EGR comes in, spot exchange comes in, the basis is this India good delivery. So that's the basis on which the exchange itself is being built, right? The framework.
Right. Yeah. So it's been phenomenal discussion. We covered a wide array of topics, and thank you all for taking your time and patiently answering the questions and spending a lot of time with us. Thank you all, and so we'll thank the viewers all for joining us. And any further questions, please post us. We will try to answer them through email, or we'll connect to you and all. So we'll try as much as possible. We have taken few questions which we felt interesting and more useful for larger audience rather than the personal ones. Few things we ignored, like what will be the gold price next month, etc. So we ignore karna pad raha hai. So those individual questions we will try and answer otherwise. So thank you all for joining, and thank you all for taking your time. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Som.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bariji.
Thank you.
Thank you all.